Real professional learning you can consume during lunch or on a dog walk or while you rake leaves. Our goal is to provide meaningful, engaging, and brief conversations for educators. I'm Kate, and my co-host today is Jeanette. And today we want to talk about something pretty specific, the reluctant learner. But the reluctant learner, or the unmotivated learner that we're talking about today, is not necessarily the learner that is openly distracting the class or defiant, but it's that learner that often has their head down, maybe their phone out, maybe there's no phone, but you say go and they're, just kind of sitting there, and you walk by 10 minutes in and they haven't written anything. That's the unmotivated learner we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, and sometimes as teachers, we can just kind of ignore them because they're not causing disruption in the class, but it breaks our hearts and makes us frustrated when we see that they're not engaging. And there's kind of like two stages. There's the lack of the initial engagement, like the kid that just does not want to be there and doesn't want to risk anything. And then there's the kid that will join at the beginning but then drops out because they don't have whatever, the long haul, the grit, whatever we want to call it, probably the mindset that they can be successful. So anyway, those kids, they're the ones who just seem not to be happy to be there in our classrooms.
Yeah, and I think there's two reasons that I kind of wanted to have this conversation today. One, I am feeling like a reluctant learner these days.
Wait, don't reveal too much, Kate.
Sometimes I'm like, okay, we got to get started.
Right.
I think everybody's feeling that a little bit. We're feeling that as a society. And kind of in conjunction with that, we are hearing from teachers and also seeing when we get into classrooms that there's perhaps an uptick in the numbers of perhaps these types of learners in the classrooms. We hear teachers saying there's just a lot of students that are really
reluctant,
really unmotivated.
Well, I tell the story at New Educator Orientation about my grandson when he was 5, asking me, what do you think is my favorite thing in the whole world? And the answer was school. And I always share that with new teachers because I think, that's all we want, right? We just want our classroom to be their favorite thing in the whole world. But sadly, that typically diminishes as kids get older.
Along that line, what we decided to do with today's episode is we decided to ask 3 different teachers, elementary, junior high, and a high school teacher. We posed the question, how do you engage the reluctant learner? Described as we have just described it, this very unmotivated, reluctant learner. They submitted a recording of their response. First, we want to start with Hannah Hoffman, who is an art teacher, a visual art teacher at West Point Junior High. And we reached out to Wendy Nelson, her principal, and asked Wendy to give us 5 words to describe Hannah. And she chose passionate, creative, engaging, energetic, and loves kids. And it is very true. Hannah is awesome. So I'm going to start with her clip because I think her idea really opens up a really good conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Hoffman. I teach over at West Point Junior. I teach fine arts 8th and 9th grade. Because I teach fine arts and it's not a core class, sometimes that can be kind of difficult keeping kids engaged when they're not necessarily interested in it. Specifically, my 9th grade foundations class, we typically get those kids that don't necessarily really want to be there. They just have put off their credit in taking that class for as long as they can. So now they're sort of stuck in that class and they don't necessarily want to be there and they have no interest in it. So obviously those are more of the reluctant learners, but I have figured out a way to get more engagement by kind of resituating the way that my class is running. Traditionally, an art foundations class might be more technical based, more classic art, but I have decided to switch it for those kids particularly. And my class, even though we're teaching core art concepts, we are now teaching them in more of an SEL base, so it's less technical and it's more expressive. And so since there's not as much pressure on technique, they are just learning to apply themselves more personally. There's a lot more involvement and there's a lot more care because it is things that they're interested in, because it's about themselves and it's about, their world around them, which is really awesome. And because of that, I have gotten a lot more engagement with the kids and they seem to be enjoying it a lot more. So that's been a really great success for me.
I have watched this class that Hannah is talking about, and it is a class of ninth graders and a lot of ninth grade boys, and her classroom is so calm. Mm-hmm. It's very mellow. It's very, it's just such good, calm, peaceful. And when I asked Hannah to address this and kind of talk about her idea to switch the approach of this Arts Foundation class, one of the things she said was they're still doing all the technical skills. They're still learning the same skills that they would learn in any Arts Foundation class. It's just that new SEL approach.
It's really kind of the personalization where she has taken her art elements or foundations, the concepts of art, and she's moved it into something that is flexible and works for the students, re-examining the way you assess, the activities that you have students work through. And she's found something that teaches the tradition, but it does it in a new way. And I was thinking about in an English classroom, if we're just, if I'm still teaching the same canon, whatever those works are that we were teaching 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 years ago, am I at least doing something with them that allows students to feel like their personal strengths as a learner and as a thinker and as someone who studies literature or someone who writes about literature, am I giving them an opportunity to apply their personal strengths and some of their personal interest and choice into that canon? That's a really, really great strategy. That person and we just know that personalization more and more is going to be the way to engage students, helping them connect it and show their strengths.
Well, and I want to add an essential part of that personalization is that relevancy piece. Because for her, this is a group of people who just need who need an art credit. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to go play in a band and they don't want to sing in the choir. So here they are in a visual arts class that they don't have an affinity for. And so for her, it was about finding that relevance. The packaging matters. And I definitely believe this as a science teacher, because I could talk for days about the functions of cells and the different parts of cells, and I would find that fascinating, but students wouldn't. I mean, why? And one of the ways I felt like I could make that relevant was starting with an essential question, packaging it differently. Why do people get sick? Or what should you do if you're sick? Or how did this person get sick? And suddenly it's packaged in something that's relevant and interesting to students. And I think that's a powerful thing.
Okay, our next great teacher, is Lynaya Hernandez, who teaches English at Viewmont High School. She was at Clearfield for the last couple of years, but now she's down at Viewmont. And I asked Chrissy Beecher, who is on the administrative team at Viewmont, to give us a few words to describe Lynaya. She said Lynaya is smart, dedicated, in touch with her students, observant, and engaging. And we have spent some time in Lynaya's class, and we would agree with all of those words. She is a bundle of energy and power and passion, for sure.
So here are my tried and true tricks for motivating unmotivated students. I think first and foremost, relationships. I know it sounds buzzwordy, and I know it's talked about a lot, but I do think especially with unmotivated students who don't have the intrinsic motivation to learn and do well on their own, I got to create that extrinsic motivation somehow. And sometimes, not all the time, it's not 100% foolproof. Some kids you just can't reach. But for the most part, when I am able to create a relationship with that student, even if they don't care about my content area or learning the skills that I'm asking them to learn, they just simply don't want to disappoint me. And I can leverage that. So I'll do anything I can to develop a relationship with a student, even if it's talk about stuff that I have to pretend to care about, like shoes and Taylor Swift. So, I'll do what I can do. Again, it doesn't work for every student every time, but it works for a lot of students. And when it does work, it is magical. And I talk a lot in my class about this concept of retroactive grace. I talk a lot about how I'm not interested in catching students in a bad grade. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in rewarding improvement, even if the improvement happens later than I like it to happen. So I talk a lot about being willing to retroactively raise their citizenship grade from a previous term if they can show me that their time management skills have improved. I talk a lot about encouraging redos on major assignments. So even if they didn't demonstrate their mastery of a skill when I wanted them to, if they can demonstrate that mastery later, I'll take it. So I just think allowing for that grace avoids that instinct of an unmotivated student to give up or bow out as soon as things get frustrating. If they can see hope in the future, they're less likely to give up. I also talk a lot about basic expectations before we even get started. And then I revert back to the expectation rather than talk to the student about their specific behavior. So for example, on day one, I say that this is a no heads down classroom. And that's just it. And that's just how we go forward. So if a student does put their head down in my classroom, I can go to them and say, hey, we don't put heads down in this classroom, thanks. And I can walk away instead of talking to that, creating a power struggle by talking to that specific student about why their head is down. I also do a lot of asking students, rather than telling them that their behavior isn't appropriate, I do a lot of like, are you okay? Do you need a drink? Is there something I can do to help you here? Because it kind of flabbergasts them when you're not mad and you're concerned. And I think students dislike an adult being concerned about them even more than they dislike an adult being disappointed in them. So, I genuinely am concerned when I communicate that. Sometimes it stops the unmotivated behavior right away because they don't want to be on your radar at all. So that's very helpful. I also have some weird tips and tricks that work for me because I just happen to be very weird as a person. And I tell my students that, I'm too old to pretend that I'm not as weird and quirky as I am. And I do think students respond to authenticity, even if your brand of authenticity is quirky. And so I think it's motivating to students to see you being unapologetically you. I gamify a lot of things. I do a lot of custom memes as feedback, and in my classroom, I do confetti parties. I involve Freddie Mercury. I do piñatas and hot sauce, and these are all my brand of particular weirdness. But I just suggest motivating students by being you and leaning into your own personal brand of weirdness and finding a way to get kids excited about your classroom and your content that's just authentically you. And in some way, kids are motivated by you just being you. So those are my ideas.
So let's start with that last piece, her particular brand of weirdness. That is such a key, getting students to connect to you. And you can't fake it. You can't be like a teacher down the hall who has this other particular brand, but you're trying to get students to connect with you and your brand. And sometimes that's silly and quirky and emotional and cheerleading or, whatever it is. Building that relationship between you and the student is just so critical, and making it so it feels different from every other room, I think is pretty critical as well. Everything in my life right now is about dog training, right? Because I've got a puppy. But one thing I think really connects to this as I'm working with this little puppy on crate training is I have found a really high value treat that she is so excited about that gets her to run into her crate. She's even testing me. She'll go in there and look at me to see if I'm going to bring out the treat. I can't always lure her with treat for the rest of her life. So then the next step is transferring the value to me. And I just think this rings so true with teachers. We can have all the rewards in the world, but ultimately the transfer of value for being in your classroom and participating needs to transfer to you. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, hope, fingers crossed, it transfers to your content, what you're teaching, the skills the students are learning, right? But that middle step is you and the relationship you build with them, and they want to come in and please you because you care about them. You've shown that in a million ways. I know this isn't brand new to teachers, but it's something to always be thinking about. Am I really, really working on that personal relationship with my kids and my particular brand of quirkiness, weirdness, whatever we want to call it? Am I getting them excited to come into my classroom because I'm in there and they love what I do in that classroom with them?
I loved, when I had my do now on the board every day, I loved having the random holiday that fell on that day. So there's like a website where there's like a holiday every single day, like pizza day or thank your neighbor day, just random holidays. And that was just like a funny thing that I enjoyed because it was the celebrate every day. And that pretty soon that was like a thing, right? It was a thing we all shared.
And they anticipated it.
Yeah, and it was fun.
And it doesn't make them have a bunch of grit to push through hard things in your classroom, but it gets them in the door ready for you to try. Yeah. Right? They'll come in ready. I wonder what Ms. Williams got up her sleeve today. Right. That's enough. Right? We'll take that.
We'll do all the other things.
That. Yeah.
Yes.
Another thing I loved is about the grace that she talks about with grading and assessments. And I think this is the standard of the day now. Teachers giving kids opportunities to go back and revisit something that they have not shown mastery of, giving them another chance, giving them a different way. So glad we're at that place now because that's huge. It makes them feel like they can be successful even if they did a bad job the first time through. She also has anticipated behavioral challenges. Here's the expectation. We don't put our heads down in this class. Oh, if you can make a list of all those things that you want to find a positive way of saying, when we're engaged in learning, we keep our heads up, we speak like scholars, whatever it is, so that you don't have to, once the first head is down, you don't have to say, oh, and by the way, I don't want your heads down on the desk. So anticipating and being positive. The positive correction when a kid, is struggling with attentiveness or sleepiness or whatever, do you need to go get a drink? Not calling them out, not talking in negative ways, but in positive ways.
And showing that concern, which then, of course, builds the relationship even more.
Yeah.
Our last teacher contributor for today is Cole Wilkes, and he teaches at Foxborough Elementary, and this is what his principal, Chris Whitaker, had to say about him. Her words were creative, problem solver, this is my favorite one so far, fashionable,
oh yeah,
genuine, and dedicated.
Well, for me, when it comes to motivating my reluctant learners, it starts the minute that they walk in that door each and every day. I like to give my students jobs so that they have ownership in the class. Now, that job can be as simple as turning on or off the lights, and that's their assigned job for the week. But this gives them a reason that they need to be there. Of course, there are certain jobs that they like to do more, such as running the store or being the teacher's helper for the week. But in order to do the fun jobs, they have to do the lower jobs in the weeks leading up to this. Now, I have my morning letter up there for the students to read, and I know that some of them don't like to read the morning letter. So what I do is I will hide something in there, such as put a yellow crayon behind your ear for a small treat, and that'd be a Skittle or something simple. But having them look for that, and then the other kids wondering, well, why did they get that and not me? So we discuss at the end what it was that they had to do in order to win that particular prize. So it just gets to where the students are excited to be there and wonder, how is Mr. Wilkes going to trick us today? When in fact, it's not a trick. It's more just motivating them to do their work. Well, when it comes to my English language learners, I find that to motivate them when we're doing language arts is to make it interactive. We act out the scenes of the book, and they're so eager. They have their hands up. They want to be that mouse in the story, or they want to be the person in that story that we are reading together. And it makes them want to participate. So it gets them to raise their hand and be part of the lesson. I find that when I'm doing math lessons with my students, that the lower performing students, when I do a whole group lesson, hide behind the ones who understand the concept. So for me to motivate those reluctant math learners, Doing small groups where they're paired with people in their same math level, they tend to do better because they're not able to hide behind somebody. They're just as smart as the person next to them, and they're able to build their skills together with people at their same skill level, and they're more motivated to learn with people and peers that are at the same level as them in math. Now, giving them multiple ways to show their knowledge and creativity in a final project, I found lets the students that are artistic or students that are technology advanced find a way that they can display their skills. I've had students build Minecraft stories to represent their social studies unit. I've had them build this beautiful poster, do all these different 3D art things to show their knowledge of the material. I let them decide, and it's important for them to be able to show their creativity in something that they're good at. Now, one of the most important things that I've had to learn is that there's no one-size solution for every student. So having multiple ways to connect with the students, finding ways that each and every student in my class can find success and be excited about school, it's a daily challenge. But if they have a reason to be at school, they're excited to be at school, and they're having fun, and they're sure to become a student that is ready and willing to learn.
I love his idea of putting something silly in the morning letter where students are then motivated or encouraged to read it. I think that's such, again, this clever way. And this is another great example of why, it's so great to hear from teachers from all levels, because I know many, even junior high teachers are thinking, oh yeah, this would work for my junior high students to do something kind of silly.
It's a quick reward. It's a quick positive reward for being there, for doing the first simplest thing, which is read the instruction, which is to read the letter. So yeah, why would you not want to start with something so easy? Because then you'll build that compliance as you get towards the more challenging asks.
Absolutely. And in the long run, right, you can then, you're building that behavior momentum of this is the norm. I mean, I always say to teachers, the first thing that you ask students to do should be something that every single one of your students can do. Yeah. And so I always had students copy the objective for the day, simply because every single one of my students, no matter their reading level, could look at the board, copy the letters into their notes for the objective. And it built that behavior momentum of oh, I can engage in this. What's next? Maybe I can engage in that too.
He also talked about relationships, but I was thinking of his putting kids in groups with math students who are at a similar place, rather than hiding behind the kids who already know the concept and can do the math work. And I thought that was just another way of coming at that community that we talked about with the relationship you have with your students. If you can build it beyond just you and the student, but if you can build that community with other students in the classroom, they'll do things for and with each other that they wouldn't want to do alone, but with support, they'll be able to perform.
And specifically peer support. That's really powerful. Right. Yeah. Peer influence, peer pressure, if you want to call it. But in this idea of this is how we roll. You're here with us.
Yeah, we'll support each other at this table through this hard math work, and either through roles that he assigns or just whatever we come up with, we'll have success together. That fosters more success, more sticking to it, more willingness to risk.
Absolutely. Jeanette and I get to share gifts today since we didn't have a guest with us today. Mine is these new Cheez-It Puffs that have just come out. They're the Cheez-Its, but puffs. They're delicious. Go find them. You'll thank me later.
Okay. I'm going to go at the other end of the deliciousness.
Okay.
Because I'm going to go with the indulgence it's got to be an occasion and it's something you plan for. But recently I ate at Market Street Grill and Oyster Bar, and I had the broiled salmon fillet with a Caesar salad on the side and their delicious bread. And it was so good. I mean, it's an indulgence because it's not cheap, but it was just, I don't know if it was just that night, it was just perfect. So if you haven't lately, a little broiled salmon Oh,
And I love
so
good
good.
Caesar salad.
Yes.
As always, we'd like to thank our producer, Tom, for making us sound so good. This season, we are also putting video of our interview on YouTube. Check the show notes for that link. Thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe and share the podcast with others. See you at school.